sure it's a good thing we don't have to
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Arnie Urken,
Steve Pothier.
Brad Nelson. Grady Rhodes.
Levoy, Hurley.
Richard Fridena.
John Cote.
Herbert, Tellman.
Brian Bickel. And I don't see any members of the public here, so we won't have a call to the public. David, since you're here, you can enlighten us with any ES&S updates and go back to Solomon.
Okay. In the middle of November, it should be November 12th through 15th. A team from ES&S will come to upgrade our DS850s and our express votes to the current version of electionware that's approved by the state. It's sorry, I just blanked out. 6021, EMS 6021. And that's what we'll use for the 2020 election season. They do have 6100 through the Election Assistance Commission certification, but I don't expect that to be approved by the state until at best halfway through 2020, maybe not till November 2020, so that one won't come into play.
What's the difference?
6021 is still Windows 7. 6100 is Windows 10. But since, as long as you maintain your air gap protocol, it's not an issue.
So what does this new software do that we don't have now?
The big leap forward is the fact that it bundles the images differently, so that instead of taking hours to send the images over, it should take minutes. We will of course find out for sure when we use it in a real election. What it also does is it gives you the option of transferring the data over as you save a batch. Before we would complete production for the day and then send everything over. This allows you that every batch you finish, it sends over that part at a time. So at the end of the night when you run your last batch, that's the only one that needs to be sent over.
So does that significantly change the frequency that you're doing? I mean, are you verifying every batch like you did verify at the end of the day?
We currently, we do verify that the counts match. So if this bag says it has 625, your machine should say 625. So we currently do that. What we were doing additionally to that was, before we would save the batch, we would, okay, we believe we counted 80,000, our machines all say 80,000, okay, so now we'll save. So it was an additional check we would do before we saved everything. Partly because you weren't able to delete a deck if you noticed a mistake. They now have incorporated that feature back in where if you realized you didn't catch your error on the third batch you ran, but we caught it at our end of counting at the end of the day, you can go back and say, okay, that was this batch here. We can delete that batch and rerun it. So you're able to correct it. I'm not sure we'll do the automatic save yet. We'll kind of want to play with our procedures to make sure all the safety checks are in place.
How do you know that even if the totals match, the individual numbers could differ in terms of who voted? Which way?
We're not allowed to look at that. So
Well, so the answer is that you can't.
you can't. You can only say that the total number of ballots processed is what you processed. And that's why you do your LNA beforehand to make, in the impression that you do an LNA beforehand and afterwards. So if it's functioning correctly before you start the election and after you start the election, there's a good chance it functioned correctly during the election.
Well, there's also a good chance it could have been penetrated, and that's been shown.
And so part of what you do in your LNA is you change your, we can't do it, we have to have IT come in and change the date on the computer so it thinks it's election day. So that when you run your LNA, it's operating under the impression that it's election day, so if there was something triggered to do that, it would happen.
Yes, it's a really smart trigger.
If it's, well, you won't be able to stop everything. And that's why we also do the hand count afterwards, so that if it's doing something significant, you'll catch it in the hand count. If it's minimal, you know, you may not catch it, but if minimal, it may not make a difference.
So you were talking about a transfer. What are you transferring to and
Oh.
how?
Our tabulation room, we have 6 ballot scanners that tabulate our ballot. And then we have a server and workstation. And all of that is a local area, a LAN. And all of the wires, it's hardwired, everything is visible so that you can see the wire from this tabulator goes up across the roof and down into your server.
So it's a local network?
Yes.
Okay, and then from the local network, do you print the results? Or do you put it on a CD and transfer? You mentioned an air gap.
So, yes, we print a hard copy for people there to look at, but we burn a file to a CD and walk that to a computer that's connected to the web. So we can upload a copy to the Secretary of State and update our
Results websites, okay. Awesome.
And we burn the CDs as one-time use CDs so that they're used once and they never come back.
And the images that are transferred so much quicker, they still are the same resolution as?
Yes, I believe so.
You're finally getting into the level of medical technology, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, we transferred x-rays all the time, and it took nowhere near the amount of time that it takes to transfer these ballot images.
I think part of the problem was they didn't believe anyone would want them. So they didn't do anything to facilitate it, you know, it was just, oh, this is a byproduct of what we do. If they want them, they're here. And so they didn't do anything about how do we get it from the machine to the server. And then when people actually said, well, we need to save it.
Which is kind of amazing, since what you count is the image, not the ballot.
That's right. Most people don't know that.
So we say here, this is a Windows 7 still system.
Correct.
For those of us that are out in radio land, we have to update to this miserable Windows 10 because it's more secure, supposedly, more up to date, more able to handle things. Do we still have the vulnerabilities of Windows 7, and will Windows 7 I think I heard it would be supported at certain locations for a while yet, but not to the public.
No, they have.
That.
They have agreed to, Windows has agreed to support Windows 7 for election services. I don't remember if it's for a year or longer than that.
And we're not.
But what secures our system is the fact that you have to physically access it to make any of the changes you were going to.
Okay, so any embedded issues in Windows 7 you feel are secure by virtue of there being no connection connection to the outside.
Yes.
And I'm sort of minimally vexed by the issue that why aren't they going ahead and upgrading to Windows 10 and getting ahead of the case?
Because sometimes going to a new operating system can be a big lift. You need to.
Well, and I don't, it's not that they haven't upgraded, it's that all of the people that have to certify it haven't certified it.
Is that the issue?
Yes, first, they had to first make sure that it worked.
Right.
And then they submitted
I'd like to
to,
think that'd be a good thing.
yeah. And then they submitted to the Election Assistance Commission testing labs, who then make sure it works. And not only
And those are the
works,
feds.
yes, and not only that it works, that the software functions, but the software functions with all of their components.
So,
Because they put it in as a suite, and now that it's past that hurdle, they have to make sure they get everything lined up so that they can submit it to the state for certification. And right now, I'm not sure what the state's priorities are. With us leading into the people.
who at the state oversees that? Which, is it under the Secretary of State? Or?
It's under the Secretary of State. They have a committee, I believe, of 3 people who basically do some testing of their own.
So, if I understand this correctly, the Secretary of State's behind on the curve and getting these changes approved. There is a Windows 10 update, but we're not going to that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that ES&S has submitted it yet, because they have paperwork and other things, and
So they're behind the curve as well.
yes, they may be. And so and then if they did have it, let's say, ready in another month or so, then that, we wouldn't want to jump into a new operating system just before an election. Our equipment should handle Windows 10, but you want to make sure of that beforehand, because some computers and components that should have been Windows 10 compatible ended up not being. So rather than risk all of this before a major election cycle, it may be safer just to say, well, there's no major security risk with what we've got now.
So if I have it in my head correctly, we're going into the 2020 election with Windows 7 and the more recent updates to Windows 7 that ES&S is providing.
Correct.
Will there be another update prior to 2020?
Actually, I don't want to get picky, but I will. We're not doing anything with Windows 7.
Correct.
Windows 7 is just the operating system that the ES&S.
I understand, but we're using Windows 7 and the Windows 7 operating system for the counting the ballots.
No, we're using ES&S software to count the ballots running on the Windows 7 operating system.
You're right, that's a little picky, but that's how I understand it.
All works to the system.
So do we expect, my question is this, do we expect another update from ES&S, or will this be pretty much what we think it's going to be unless they find a glitch somewhere?
There is an upgrade that has been submitted at 6040 that may become available between the PPE and the primary. I don't see any need to upgrade to that one. It's not going to be giving us something additional that we need. The upgrade would take the team from ES&S coming back and changing our 310 express votes and 6 DS850s. And then they also have to come in and wipe the servers and the workstations and reload all the software on it. And
Sounds messy.
And we need to bring in Pima County IT to watch them do it so that they can then harden the system and lock the elections department out of certain functions so that we can't dump the trash can or change the clock or that kind of things that administrative features that we don't need to do, we don't need to handle so that we can't do anything additional to what our jobs are. So
That's
for security.
60/40. No, that's for 60/40?
Yeah, that if we wanted to go to 60/40, we would have, well, for any upgrade, they have to do that.
Yeah.
And so we'll have them do all of this for 60/21, and then if we do it again 3-4 months later, that for something, for a component we're not gonna use, I don't see a need to do that.
So there's no anticipation of having the 6100, the Windows 10 version, available after the presidential preference election?
No, at the very best, it may be between the primary and the general, but I don't see
That's
that.
not the time to.
No, and I'm not sure that they would be able to get that done because the Secretary of State's office will be busy as well, and they may not have time to say, okay, we'll have a committee to check that.
David, could you clarify who was the certification group? Is it an appointed commission? Is it a committee of staff? Can you clarify that?
I believe they are appointed. I know one needs to be a lawyer in good standing. Another one is an engineer, and I think they may need to be a university engineer, professor. And then one is somebody with election experience, and that one currently is, well, and generally it's somebody from the Secretary of State's office. And I believe it's the Assistant Elections Director at the moment.
So
David,
that's,
on the upgrade reviews, do they physically inspect the code line by line the way they're supposed to do with the initial submission?
oh
At the state or at the fed level?
Either.
I'm not exactly sure what they do at either. I think the federal level is a longer duration, and I believe they do have to submit the code to them for review. I'm not sure that's done at the state level.
I mean, even at the federal level, if it's simply an upgrade rather than a whole new system, they still look at the line-by-line inspection of the code?
It depends on some part of it. They I'm sure they do a comparison to say, these are the only changes that have been made. So these are the lines we will look at. If they have passed recently that if it's a minor enough change, so that if all you are changing, we'll say, is the script that appears on the window when you start, like insert ballot here to insert ballot to that little thing down there, they can pass with less work, because if they look and see that the software, all that's changed is that phrase there, they may do a quick check on the equipment, but not their full exhaustive testing.
Do you run a test deck
Yes, we do,
after you've installed this new system?
yes, and what we are planning on doing is creating, since the elections are not backward compatible,
Okay,
we won't be able to run an old test deck.
so we need new test decks.
So what we would do is we would create a mock election and then run that. And then, of course, before we would run a real election, we do our traditional test.
Is it as a perception issue for Ms. Tellman here and the other folks that are oriented towards computeronics? Would it be appropriate for the Democrats and the Republican Party, they both have test decks that they run when we do these things?
We do that routinely, every election.
We
Yeah,
do
no,
that.
I know that, but I'm talking about after this installation.
What difference does it make when you run your test deck as long as you run?
Well,
your
we
test
have
deck?
new software and you want to see if it works right. That's the
There's more
difference.
time to correct any problems that might be found.
I don't think you're gonna correct the problem. If you find it, we're probably gonna.
If I may, and David and I have talked very formally about this, so for those of you who've been on the board for a while, and those perhaps who've not, we conducted a risk limiting audit in which we produced a ballot, and 30,000 of those ballots marked in such a way. After this upgrade, whichever one we are able to go to, we will do that once again to be able to have a deck of 30,000 that are not just machine marked, but perhaps marked by some of you, as well as to go through the machine as well. So we are going to do, of course, the statutorily required test before every election, but in a kind of as a test drive, if you will,
Right.
we're going to make this mock election and run it through and see what happens.
I think we'd like to be involved. Whatever.
Absolutely.
And if that's
So
possible.
if you had
And
any,
Barbara or whoever from your,
the only reason the political parties haven't been involved in the past has been their choice.
well, all right, so
To
we'll
not,
fix that.
they've opted out rather than not being permitted to opt in.
For those of you who weren't here when we ran the risk limiting audit, we will be, for this future experience, just as we did for the past experience, inviting other counties to show up, inviting the Secretary of State to show up as well. So it's going to be as open as we can make it.
That's great.
Okay.
And I don't mean to infer anything by what I'm saying,
No.
Mr. Bickel, but I don't want to not ask the question either and then go through, come out of here with some.
Now, we'll be able to test just how fast images are downloaded, things of that nature, because the test decks that we produce for the, if you will, the countywide elections, sometimes are not as vigorous as what we're going to hope to do with the ballots that we do with this RLA.
Greg, can you clarify, you don't mean we're going to do another risk
All right,
limiting?
No, we're just going to.
Use the ballots.
No, we are not, but just to give you an idea, it's not going to be a small test deck, it's going to be 30,000 plus ballots.
So we have the ballots left over.
Exactly, exactly.
When if I may, Chairman, last spoke to Brad, I understood that David here was getting a new certification, and I understand he's got it, and I wish somebody would explain that to the group. I'd like for us to all acknowledge what hard work he's doing.
Yeah, it's not on the agenda.
Nope.
But he's a good guy, I'll say that much.
And the achievement he reached was,
I'm going to not mention it because it's not on the agenda. But I would be glad after the adjournment to pat him on the back and give him all the kudos he deserves.
Oh, he's going back to work.
He's going back to work.
So have you had your hands on this version yet, or?
They demoed it for us. I have the manuals for it, and I've read through those.
So things like different ways of exporting, for instance.
No, it looks like it's still XML, CSVs, and ASCII. Although you can also do PDFs of the results, which are not friendly for anyone doing any analysis, but if we post the PDFs on the website, they're at least pretty. I didn't mention it also eliminates ERM. Our current version, the results are tabulated primarily through ERM. This puts everything in electionware. So before we were exporting two types of files to a server, now it's back to one. Let's see. But we will have a chance to see. That's one of the other things we want to do in December, once everything is in place, is to see, okay, does everything work as advertised, and what are all of our exports? And then I'm sure interesting parties can see from our test, our mock election, is this more useful for analysis than something else?
You have a time frame on the mock election?
Well, with,
I mean,
Yeah,
other than between the primary and the PPE.
my guess is the PPE, for those who don't recall, is March 17th. We should have that done locally and at the statewide level by April 1. I would guess the mock election could be done in mid-May. Does that sound doable?
Yes. I think we may do, not the real mock election, but just a little test one.
A mock.
Yeah, for a couple of weeks in December before everyone is away for holiday, just to make sure, do our own in-house testing after they do their installation and acceptance testing.
So that's going to be done before the PPE.
To make sure we know how to program election correctly. So once we have our hands on the program, we'll go in and put together something simple so we know, oh, okay, ERM isn't changing much. I mean, electionware isn't changing much functionally, or the way we interact with it. But that being said, we want to make sure that that's correct, and that we can put in all the precincts we need to, put in voter registration figures, put our candidates and our districts in, so that we know, okay, this does function the way the old one does, and okay, we generate an election, we have our VOD printers, we can print half a dozen ballots. Oh, okay, those are read correctly by each of our 6 850s, because they're upgrading to print a couple on our express votes, and that functions, just so we know before we start the PPE election programming the first week in January, that everything works as we expect. So, and that'll give us, once we have an election on the system, we can then produce the different exports and take a look at all the different levers we can switch on an export and say, oh, okay, for election night reporting, we just want summary, we don't want precinct detail, or maybe we do. Okay, a summary will give us 5 pages. Oh, precinct detail is 1,000. No, we don't want, So it's not until we start flipping some of the different switches we can see, oh, okay, we want this, we want the little extra candy they give us, or we don't want it. So, but we will want something in place so we can do that kind of review.
So are you saying you can actually validate the new system, but run the PPE on the old system?
No.
Okay.
No.
So once you install, whether you've done the full 30,000 ballot deck or not, you're running the new software. It doesn't
yes.
matter because it only impacts the Democratic Party.
Well, the Greens have until 5 p.m. today.
So I thought they'd already made that decision.
I talked to the Secretary of State yesterday, and they have until 5 p.m. today to be
So
on
are they, do they have to opt in or opt out?
If they have to opt in, and silence is considered opting.
Okay.
Fortunately, that's a relatively simple election. One question, list of candidates, no write-ins.
What's the deadline for a final list of candidates to review?
for?
For the PPE,
Maybe,
I believe they have, I think December 12th is their last day to put their paperwork in to certify as a candidate. The Secretary of State has 72 hours to produce a list. But then during that time, they also have to schedule a point where they pull names out of a hat. And so I think they have to send a certified list in 72 hours to everybody, but they need to put them in, pull the names out of a hat so that they can give up everybody the list, because they determine, that random drawing determines the order of the names on the PPE.
well, they don't get rotated like
Yep.
They do not get rotated, making it even easier to program.
Before you go, since we've never met, what's your last name, what's your job title?
Oh, David Wiseley,
Wiseley.
and my job title is program specialist. But I'm the supervisor for our for programming our election management system and programming our election equipment and ballot tabulation.
Thanks.
He runs the calendar,
Yeah, introduce that.
5 or 6 women, and they're running these machines.
Any other questions for David? David, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Next item was attendance. And I asked to have this on the agenda just to generate some discussion and not violate the open meeting law by talking about things that we shouldn't talk about. I got an email from Michael that said we had several members that had missed more than 40% of the meetings.
From who? Michael, okay.
Which, depending on how you look at it, was correct or incorrect. Certainly, I got response after I corresponded with the people that had missed that many, that they didn't feel that was the case. I did have some concern with the way you structured one of your memos in response to Jeff, where you said you've missed 4 of 9 so far this year. And it doesn't specify in the bylaws the way they're currently written. And we may have to have another bylaws review, Arnie.
That's
Doesn't
specify.
But, you know, it may behoove being more explicit in how it's stated. You've missed X number of meetings in the past 12 months, because if you're saying you've missed X number of meetings this year, well, if you've missed January's meeting, you've missed 100% of the meetings, if we're going on a calendar year, and I don't believe that's the intent. I think it's a floating 12-month period. In the past 12 months, you've missed X number of meetings. If we're going to talk about a percentage during a particular calendar year, if you miss January or February, you're pretty much screwed as having missed a certain percentage of the meetings. And it doesn't specify either way. It just says 40% of the meetings. It doesn't say in this calendar year or in a running 12-month period.
Right, it does, it's very clear, it says in a calendar year.
Okay, then that needs to change, because if anybody misses January.
Well, but it also says that,
Scheduled for the.
yeah, but it also says that it's not automatic.
Right,
Yeah,
we have some discretion.
absolutely.
But with the furor that this little episode created, I just as soon say it'd be a rolling 12-month period, which requires a bylaws change, and we can have the bylaws committee meet, or we have to have a new member on the bylaws committee since we lost our 3rd member.
I was gonna say, after suffering through the last bylaws thing that took a year and a half, please wait till my replacement.
May not give you anything to worry about. Be it known that, and certainly there's no overt attempt to get rid of anybody, but the other thing I would like to see if you're gonna notify me when they've violated the statute and the bylaws, please notify me when they're within a meeting of doing that. And I will notify them sooner rather than saying, oops. You know, I would like to have the correspondence where it says, you know, you've missed 3 in the last 12 months. Be aware that if you pick up a 4th, we may have a problem. Rather than saying,
Is it 4 or 5 or what?
That should be in the bylaws.
Well, it's 40%.
It's
Four
40%.
consecutive or 40%. And that basically comes up to 5, I
is
think.
it 4 consecutive? Yeah, 4 consecutive, yeah, it's,
So
Then
it's
there's, then
5
you-
or 4?
well, it's 4.4.
Yes,
It depends on
exactly.
whether you round up or down.
then there's a vote and it has to pass with 2/3.
Two-thirds.
of the
Well,
commission.
let me also ask this question. I don't know how you guys are doing the math, but since I've been here, we always
Benny White.
don't have a meeting in December.
It's regularly scheduled.
So there's really only 11 meetings in a year.
Right.
Well, it can be better defined.
It could be better defined.
Do we really need a bylaws committee to make a simple change like that?
Well, I'm not sure what the bylaws say about.
Change the bylaws? Sorry, I asked.
I think it's,
He should be on the committee.
It'll be
does
short.
the board of supervisors have to approve it?
No, they're ours. It's one of the few things we get to do on our own.
Is it something we could make a motion to have somebody, a couple people get together, next meeting, we approve them or not approve them, or does this become some elongated affair?
You have to check the bylaws.
We'll check the bylaws and get back to you. Next meeting.
Should I take a nap?
It took us almost 2 years to get done with the bylaws review last time.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, and part of it was the bylaws hadn't been reviewed since the inception of the committee.
Sure.
So, and I believe the bylaws do state that we have to review them at least once every 5 years.
For what's being talked about here, very specifically what's stated in the bylaws is that the EIC may remove this.
Right.
Doesn't mean that anybody has to ever be
Correct.
removed for anything, just
And
show up to the
I
meetings.
don't like, well, we'll leave it up to the committee to make that change. I'm not a big fan of May.
So Jeff has resigned, can we assume that the other 2 choose to remain on? All right.
Jeff was not on the committee, was he?
Is it?
Not the bylaws committee.
No.
So of 3 people fit the category of having missed 4 meetings in this calendar year. Of the 3, Jeff was one, and Jeff, the way I phrased it in the memo, I said to them, please evaluate your time constraints and if appropriate, continue, or if appropriate, don't continue. And Jeff said his court schedule has gotten to the point where he feels he can no longer participate, so Jeff has resigned from the commission. And I've had conversations with Supervisor Valadez, who is his appointing authority, about getting somebody appointed as quickly as possible. So, and the other 2, who shall remain nameless, know who they are, and have opted to continue to participate.
We can get you some names if you'd like some names.
No, I think we can find myself.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we
Okay,
put
but-
that on the next agenda to consider a bylaw change.
Yeah, we'll get to that in future agenda items. Memos and responses to the Republican review. I did submit a memo to Mr. Huckleberry, basically, and I think we discussed this last month, but we can rehash it again. Just pointing out to him, and we got confirmation from our Republican colleagues that they never presented it to him as this was a product that I see. It just so happened that the majority of the members of their study group were either current or former members of the EIC.
All were in defense of you.
I did get a memo back from Mr. Pothier that basically said he did acknowledge the meeting and felt like it was appropriate for him to meet with anybody that wanted to talk about elections. I certainly wasn't trying to tell him that he couldn't meet with anybody to talk about elections. Just make sure you tell everybody who you're meeting with correctly. I will send him another memo, giving him an open-ended invitation to attend this meeting anytime he chooses to do so. And submit that same memo to the people that created the commission. Not that I have any hope that any of the 6 individuals in question will ever show up at this meeting, but I think it's from my perspective, it's a dealt with issue and doesn't require any further activity on our part.
I'm not sure whether the rule is out of order, but given that the recorder and the county attorney will both be retiring and be replaced by elected officials, would it be reasonable to invite the candidates to attend one of our meetings for their, so they can learn about us, but perhaps so we could put some of the questions that we've discussed about management of elections to them, to see what their thinking is?
I certainly don't have a problem inviting them. The only problem I would have as a candidate who has been in situations where you have multiple candidates, I don't want to have candidate A show up one meeting and candidate B show up another meeting. And there are, certainly in the recorder's race, there are multiple candidates. If we're going to invite the candidates, I want all the candidates here or none of the candidates here. I don't want the perception that this commission is showing any kind of favoritism to a particular candidate in an election. And I have real concerns right now, and we'll wait until after April 6th when we know what's really happening. But right now, to the best of my knowledge, there are no Republican candidates for either one of those offices.
I was told Bill Beard was planning to run for the
He has not formally filed as of this point in time.
I've talked about it for years, so.
He did it once. He did it once.
Well, yeah, he's run once.
He did once, he did just start.
But as of this point in time, there's no Democratic candidate or no Republican candidate for the county attorney, the county assessor, or the county recorder. So, I don't need there to be a perception that the Election Integrity Commission is inviting the Democratic primary candidates, but nobody else. So,
Good point, I agree.
Personally, I don't care for that kind of thing to be on the agenda as an agenda item. Okay, now, if they want to show up to meet and greet after the meeting or something like that,
that's fine.
kind of thing. No problem with that.
I agree.
Once they get elected, we'll invite whoever's running the department in, and they
We're
can
off the agenda.
tell us to go ahead and say yes. All right, procedure thing.
Brian?
Yes.
Can I go real quickly back to the bylaw thing? I can clarify some things here. Mr. Chairman,
Does it have to do with attendance or amending the bylaws?
amending.
No.
Okay. It'll be a future
agenda item.
Covered then. Okay. Good then.
Procedures
You
manual.
skipped over, I'd like to
No, I
just
didn't
point
skip-
out these
I
questions.
haven't skipped over any, but
Right.
procedures manual was item number 7, right after the memos and
At the
responses.
response to the Republican review.
That was it, his response.
It's right here.
That's what we were discussing. Okay. That kind of got lumped into everything.
That's okay.
The memos, yeah,
It is.
fine, no problem.
So I won't go through everything except to say that I mean, it's good procedure if you're proposing an improvement to define the problem so everybody can understand it, and then evaluate the proposed solution to see how it meets your criteria. And what I tried to do was list some things that haven't been discussed, to the best of my knowledge, about that. And particularly cost is one thing, because in our culture we don't raise taxes. Even both parties seem to be averse to talking about taxes for a variety of reasons. And I just wonder how you're going to pay for it or what it costs. Maybe it's not costly. Maybe there's a cost savings. I don't know. And there was no discussion of who uses this signature verification to be able to address any of those issues. So I think that's one thing. The other issue is privacy. There's no discussion of who's going to own that data. You know, whether individuals can opt out of it, for example, not give a wet signature. Will they go to jail or just not be able to vote? Those are very difficult issues. And I think that, particularly if it were proposed that those signatures be part of the package of information that the recorder makes available to the parties, that would scare me a bit. So I think all those things should be addressed.
Let me put a little amplification on that. We are aware of people, counties have used signature verification. We did not come to this to pull a hat, taking a hat and taking a number out of a hat. And to that end, as we go forward, we'll explore it better. We clearly think it's a better situation to go to long term. Now, that having been said, a lot of this has to be sorted out at the legislature because they all have views about it as well. That being said, who knows what the strength of their convictions are in terms of numbers when you start talking about legislative solutions. So we'll have to see how some of that works out. We did not address specifically the issue of the ownership of that data because that ownership now, I think, appears to be in the hands of Pima County in this case, or the city. We didn't attempt to say anything about that. If somebody wants to opt out of this or that, well, we need to understand why they want to opt out and for what reason. And they want to opt out because they're not a citizen. You know, at what point do you opt out? So those things are worthy of discussion, but we didn't attempt to solve every problem. We attempted to solve the ones that were apparent to us that looked like they could be helpful. And as I've said on several occasions, at the recorder's office, those ballots are handled and handled and handled and handled and handled, and then Brad's people get them and they handle them again, handle them again, handle them again. And I applaud personally the desire that they have to keep the paper trail and the custody of the paper trail clean. That's great, given the system we have. But at some point, it's going to be a little bit like me. There was a time, believe it or not, when I wore a size 28 pants, and I've outgrown that. So that's what we were thinking about as we went forward. And again, we didn't try to solve every problem. And probably, the truth being, we maybe left some on the table. There's no axe to grind in any of this. It's just trying to get things better. And
as with any complex problem, there are a lot of potential loose ends and
Ups and downs.
loose ends you don't know about yet, so, but these things are important enough to discuss before you propose it for serious consideration.
These,
Well, we kicked it around, it didn't lay around in the desk drawer and suddenly it pop out. Look at the time it took to generate just the concerns, a narrative. It wasn't one or two people or three people or four people. In the end, four people and the chairman approved the findings. In the end, four people and the chairman made us boil this down to a list of suggestions to be implemented. But it got ground pretty good, and there was no end of diversity in thought, unless you had to sit there and understand, well, is this wrong if we do this? No, well, it's not, but would it be more, to use a term of mine, not the correct English, more better if we did this? Maybe so, but not this go-round.
Well, since you bring it up, I mean, one of the values of having a group like this, despite its limited powers, is that it has a collective body of experience which can be useful in evaluating ideas wherever they come from.
Right.
And I would humbly suggest that before you do something like this in the future, you pay us the courtesy of allowing us to comment.
Okay, I mean, and this is part of the nature of my memo to Mr. Huckleberry is, and this is the thing that we're having difficulty with. What they did, we can't keep them from doing. It was an exercise of the Republican Party. Sure. My concern was it was represented by Mr. Huckleberry as the Republican members of the Election Integrity Commission, which happened to be an accurate statement, but gave the perception that it came from this group, which it didn't. It came from the Republican Party. I think, no, I know the recommendation that I made for future agenda items at our last meeting was the body of work that you did might be productive, but rather than try and shovel the whole mountain at one time, give us a particular issue out of that body of work that you would like to discuss at a subsequent meeting, and we would be happy to discuss it at this meeting. What I came up with, and I think this is the thing that you said you weren't going to reprint, was the summary that they sent out, because
That giant handout
Okay.
from last time.
and again, what we have is a summary that addresses every issue that was a part of that body of work. And I don't want to sit here and pick little pieces out of either the original body of work or the summary. You guys generated the body of work. Pick something out of that body of work, a topic or two, that we can put on the agenda items, or on the agenda for future agenda items, and discuss it at length, be it electronic verification of signatures, or secret questions at the recorder's office, or providing ID at the polling place, or, you know, any particular item. But I'm still sitting here looking at a 5 or 6 page document that's the summary. And I don't want to attempt to discuss every item on the summary in the course of one meeting. Pick something, and over a period of time, we'll get through the whole thing and discuss whether we can or can't do anything about it, or whether it makes any sense to move forward with it or not.
Thank you.
when I sent this to Mike, the package and stuff, I tried to make clear, to your point, you have a good point there, to make clear that when we were distributing this to the EIC, it was an information-only distribution, okay? I had no illusions about trying to address the whole thing. To your point about making individual items, hey, it's a good idea, good point. Pick ones to do that kind of thing. And then the discussion, to me, if you get items that you're really interested in, then you proceed with making proposals, start looking at cost-benefit analysis, things like that. We did not live with every item on here. That was intentional. These are thoughts and ideas to discuss. If we had done that with every item under that stack of paper, too that tall. So, sorry, it just didn't make any sense to, and it didn't fit the purpose of what we were trying to do. So you're good points, but those come after, I believe those come after the discussion, and we can get that point. We're not there yet.
Just, I mean, in terms of experience, there have been a lot of ideas that come through the commission, and particularly when you say something like, this is non-controversial and is consistent with county law or state law, you know, it's like never say never. I mean, you can't predict what the county attorney is going to say. We've been surprised many times, going all sorts of ways on less controversial issues. So I think that's kind of procedural naivete that could have been avoided if we had discussed some of these things originally. The world was just more complicated than that.
So what is the next step going forward if you wish to make some specific proposals? So we put them on a future agenda and talk about it at that point?
I would, before we do that, I would like to go back and give a little bit of history, because I think we're maybe not all on the same page. From the 2018 election in November, there were some observations. And by the time I think we started discussing this around April of our...
It actually started earlier.
Okay, so that's
Before you were.
before I was a part of this commission. But there were many times, this is a running agenda item on our agenda for this meeting of discussing our findings. By the time July rolled around, we had a complete observations and kind of recommendations of what we'd like to see done. That's what we went to Chuck Huckleberry with, and he, and by the way, that was in the November meeting when we spent, I think it was like an hour and a half or something discussing that.
Not November.
Did I say November? In July.
In July.
My apologies, I misspoke. But we spent quite a bit of time discussing that. After that meeting, a few days later, it was Chairman Eppiheimer who went to Chuck Huckleberry and wanted to have a meeting to discuss this. That's when we had presented what we had. He suggested that this could be put on the Board of Supervisors agenda to be incorporated into legislative, I forget the right term.
Legislative agenda.
Well, to be promoted by the county's, I'm sorry?
Lobbyists.
The lobbyists, thank you, that's what term I'm looking for. So that's when we produced the second document, which is what we believe is recommendations for legal changes at the state level. So there's two separate things. I believe we discussed quite a bit in this meeting the first set of documents, which is the observations and the recommendations. I think what you're referring to, wanting to discuss more, is the legal recommendations to the state, well, to the Board of Supervisors that would then be lobbied to the state legislature. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Well, let me add something into this, if I can. Ad nauseum, we went through this stuff in these meetings, and I think I was clearly told by you guys that you didn't want to hear about the recorder, and you didn't, and only things that applied to Brad. So we began to scale some of this back. You can't talk about elections. I said this, I don't know, I've been to 15 meetings, this is the 15th time. You can't talk about elections and elections integrity without talking about the work that the recorder does, especially when 80% of the ballots are mail-in ballots that are generated by her to start with. So, and that's that's, I think, a model for what's going forward. It'll only get it to be a bigger percentage, not a smaller percentage. And some of our people, some Republican, conservative Republican members go, and were a former Libertarian friend here, they would pound the desk and say, paper ballots only, paper ballots only. Go to the, that's what, we have ballots and precincts and voting polls and blah, blah, blah for it. And there's some measure of thought to that. And when I know, addressed the issue that this was a system that neighbors were polled, were checking on neighbors. And they, everybody in those days knew, a lot of people knew who someone was.
Just your presentation.
Yeah, this is-
You showed us 3 or 4 times.
So, well, all right, but no matter how I shorten it, I don't want to be accused of not having mentioned it. So here we are again, when we start to talk about these recommendations, we are by their very nature going to have to talk about how they affect the recorder.
Okay, fine. I have no problem with that. And when I answered you as yes, maybe no, everything you said was factual. The problem I had, and I won't speak for anybody else on the commission, was Mr. Huckleberry's memo where he identified, had this come across as, this is input from the Republican Party, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The headline in his thing was, the Republican members of the Election Integrity Commission presented this. You guys have assured us, and I have no reason to doubt you, that you didn't present it as representing anything the Election Integrity Commission has done. And I made very clear, I thought, in the memo that I sent to Mr. Huckleberry, is it's a body of work that was very well done, very comprehensive, but it's a work product of the Republican Party. It's not a work product of the Election Integrity Commission. Now, if there are things in that work product that you want to discuss in this meeting, I don't have a problem with that either. But I don't want to take on that whole document and expect to get anything meaningful done in one meeting. Pick an item or two, have them put on the agenda, either at the meeting as a future agenda item, or when Michael sends out the request for items to be added to the agenda, whatever you'd like to discuss in that particular monthly meeting, put them on the agenda and we'll discuss them.
We'll get together and do that.
Okay,
May I ask one question? Put one comment?
briefly.
Well, if possible.
I don't think it's possible.
We have a November meeting and then we have no December meeting. It would be better, I think, if we do this starting in January or whenever, so it's consecutive. So this is sort of like the summer break. Everybody's mind is thinking about turkey and Christmas. And if you support that as a notion, that's fine. If you'd like us to put something on the November agenda, we will. It's your choice, sir.
No, it's your production. You decide when you want to put it on the agenda.
That's fine.
You know, the agenda is something that Barbara and I control, and I don't believe we have ever said, no, you can't put this on the agenda. Or if it is, it's something that was just completely out of left field, like, you know, are we going to provide turkeys to the community food bank? That has nothing to do with this organization. There's no reason for it to be on the agenda, but whenever you're ready and whatever you want to put on the agenda.
So point of clarification for me is, if I want to add something to the agenda, I should communicate with you and not Michael.
No,
Send it to me?
send it to him. He sends it to us.
Okay. I just want to be clear.
Well, preferably, if you can, present it at the meeting. At the end, where we got the point, otherwise, through that, yes.
It's if it's not a top of mind issue at this meeting and we go through the future agenda items and you don't think of it, there's always an opportunity that's driven by his timeline as to when things need to be in certain locations to comply.
You can do it any time before then as well. Just send me the information, I'll send it to the chair. They'll say, yep, put it on the agenda.
I mean, if you follow the timeline, there's a provision in the bylaws,
Yes.
I think, that allows a challenge at the meeting to change the agenda. So it's important to have the timeline in place.
So whenever you guys are comfortable putting something on the agenda that you want to discuss, then I'm happy to discuss anything, whether I am in favor of it or adamantly opposed to it.
So,
Evidenced by the fact that I get off the agenda frequently here just because I like the dialogue.
just to clarify, that packet that we presented to Chuck Huckleberry.
The big one.
Was discussed in minute detail by John in this meeting. So, in the July particular meeting. So, I mean, we have gone through that. But we have accepted your challenge that we will look at that and see what we want to rehash and address again.
And my recollection of the July meeting probably isn't what your recollection is. I don't know that we went through the whole thing and came up with any definitive conclusions.
No.
And if there's no definitive conclusions, then all we had was a discussion
So,
with
but
no
we did
input.
go through all the remarks,
Yeah.
and it was clear that lines were closed and roles were polarized. By the way, I don't particularly like Republicans on one side and Democrats on the other, Barbara, so I think we should come together on that.
It's not a Republican.
And he's not a Democrat. So
That's all
When I
right.
tried to sit there last time, you objected to that.
No, and you had his seat. You were in my seat, I sat next to him.
Okay, let's move on.
Just
Let's
reminds-
move on,
Okay.
move on, move on.
we,
Accept your challenge.
yeah,
Done.
all right. Moving on to the procedures manual. Barbara.
Yes, the procedures manual has been officially submitted on time by October 1st. It has not yet been signed by anybody, but they have a very nice summary, which I printed off their website, which is a basic summary of the significant changes that they made as a basis of the public input. And I suggested all of you read it. It's by topic and it's very nicely done.
Did you have that distributed?
It's in
You
your
can go on
packet.
the secretary, no, it's not.
Get that?
No, I just printed this off last night. All you have to do is go on the Secretary of State's website and look, search our procedures manual. Okay, well, maybe Michael can do that then. They did accept
Send me
a
a copy
couple
of
of
that
my,
document, I'll email it to everybody.
yeah, they did accept a couple of my suggestions, and I think some of Danny's suggestions, I think they were pretty open to some public input. And I'm very pleased with the whole thing.
Okay, anything else on the procedures manual?
Only thing I would add is by statute, the AG and the governor have until December 31st to act upon it. So presumably they could make inquiries and things of that nature, but by December 31st, that should become the law of the land, so to speak.
Do you have any issues with it?
And it's something like 543 pages, of which several hundred are just forms.
It is vast improvement over what the draft was previously.
Several hundred of the pages are just forms, sample forms for them to use.
So they actually have to sign off on it?
Yes.
If they don't, it becomes like a pocket veto type of thing?
No, if they don't sign off on it, we continue to operate under the 2014 elections procedures manual.
So it becomes like a pocket veto,
Yes.
basically, for, okay, just curious.
I think they did an excellent job, very thorough.
Good.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Okay, legislative update, Barbara.
Just one thing I wanted to bring in, Bill Beard was carefully following all the issues in the legislature that had elections in their keyword. He missed one really significant one that turned out to be in the criminal justice section that I wasn't aware of until it became law, it was signed, and that they made it easier for felons to regain their voting rights. And this was done not by the liberals, it was done by the gun lobby. Because the entire law circles around gaining the right to own a gun. And incidentally, you get the rest of your civil rights, so you get to vote.
But when did it go into effect?
When the governor signed it, whenever.
Right, 90 days after.
Yeah.
90 days after seeing it die.
It's kind of an interesting twist.
Yeah, so the significant change is that felons no longer have to pay all their fines and fees and so forth.
Really?
But they do still have to pay restitution.
Yes.
Yeah.
I asked because I dealt with somebody who was a previous felon
Mhm.
trying to get his back. So I did some research on, I was just wondering if I was looking at the old law or the new law. I think it
Yeah,
wasn't.
it's in the new version.
Which became effective late August.
August
Okay, it was
26th.
about the time I looked at it, so it was easy, and the guy done something 40 years ago in Alaska or something like this, you know? So it turned out to be a piece of cake
Yeah,
for him.
and I think it's partly in response to what's going on in Florida, where voters passed a law making it possible for felons to vote, and then the legislature made it more difficult again, and now they're in court over.
I found out that it's, though it is not the state where you're registering that matters, it's the state where you committed the felony where it matters.
And you have to go to court there to do whatever you.
Well, you have to do whatever the procedure says.
Yeah. Depending on the felony, it gets progressively more difficult to get your rights back.
Turns out this guy didn't have to do it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring you up to date on this one law that we missed about watching it last spring.
Speaking of legislative updates and bringing up Mr. Beard's name, is there anybody here that wants to volunteer to take on the project that he used to do by identifying all of the elections bills and producing a summary?
It was useful.
Let us talk about it, and between the three of us, and we'll come up with a name that we can suggest to you and others that are here to decide if they'd like to do it as well.
Basically, it's fairly easy. You go, if you're computer literate, you go into the legislature's website and you
I will
want to
tell-
pick all the bills
I
that
will
meet
tell you,
the
it can't
keywords.
be me because my eyes glaze over with the computer these days.
Yeah,
It's
so
a physical problem.
it's a fairly simple thing. You
not a
just
mental
go,
problem.
fairly simple thing. You just go there and ask for the keywords that deal with legislation and vote or whatever, and make a list.
And you have to have the passion to want to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on legislative updates? Dr. Ryan's op-ed article on election security, I asked to have this put on here, and the way I read it, it had to do with him asking for support for the SAFE Act at the federal level, and SAFE is an acronym for something, I don't know what it is, but I believe shortly after our last meeting, it actually was approved by both houses of the legislature and signed into law. And it has to do with something for allocation of federal funds to support cybersecurity in local elections. Am I reading that correctly, or?
I need to go back and readdress or get a better feel of what actually passed, because I know what came out of the House, but I don't know what came out of the Senate. So.
Okay.
But this is the legislation that was controversial in a partisan way because Mitch McConnell refused to consider any such legislation, and then he did a turnaround and said that he was introducing a solution to the problem that was something they wanted all along. And of course, as Brad has pointed out, that every bill that goes through is never the same as the one you just stepped onto, so these are never that simple. But it apparently does propose a lot of things, but as I understand it, the deadline for implementing it is after the next election. I might be wrong about that.
If not after in such close proximity that it may be hard to.
Not feasible, right?
Just as a point of correction, it wasn't just Mitch McConnell. There was only one Republican that voted for that out of the House. So,
There was something wrong with it.
so there was something in there that was caused a poison pill, what I would call a poison pill. And these things are usually sorted out between the House and the Senate. and it
Well, that's
sounds
knowing
like
that there are differences.
So don't blame it on
and
Mitch.
Sorry?
Please do not blame it on Mitch
I
McConnell.
didn't blame him on that. I said
Okay.
he took credit for stopping consideration of the bill. I didn't say it was all his fault. I mean, he can't do that
It's-
all alone.
It's
He's
pretty
just one
hard
person.
it's pretty hard to look at something that comes out of the House that's 320 some odd to 1 in terms of support and say that that was a bipartisan bill. It wasn't.
That's why they get paid the big bucks.
Okay,
Let's move on.
Anyway, they did pass something, we don't know what they passed.
yes.
Yeah.
All right.
They have their staff read it.
Put the safe bill on, never mind, I'll do that at the appropriate time. Upcoming elections, I'm gonna assume this is red.
May I also include in this item number 14 from Barbara about November election
Could
plans?
be a
Because-
one item.
Okay, I don't know whether they are to be distinguished, the upcoming elections is not the November election, but we have a November 5th election, the logic and accuracy test has been conducted. Approximately, as of yesterday, 2,500 ballots have been turned over from the recorder's office to mine. They're tentatively, depending upon the volume of ballots to count, we will begin tabulating ballots for that election, I should say elections plural, on October the 30th. For those of you who may not recall, the county elections department is not involved in the city of Tucson elections, but we do have numerous school district elections and one fire district election. So for those of you who may not recall, it's Amphitheater School District, Floating Wells School District, Sunnyside School District, Alter Valley Elementary School District, and the Golden Ranch Fire District.
Would you comment on, there was a little insert in today's paper about how the county recorder had sent inappropriate ballots out?
Well, I can tell you inappropriate ballots did not go out. What my understanding is, and I've not spoken with the recorder about it, but certainly when it happened, some inquiries came to me, and my understanding is the ballot itself, the thing that the voter actually cast his or her votes on, is perfect. It's the insert that came along with those ballots in that mail ballot package that had an English date of election that was accurate, but the Spanish version had an inaccurate election date, is my understanding.
Yes, it was the voter information sheet.
Yeah.
The ballots were fine.
Having received that, I live in unincorporated Phoenix County, not the city of Tucson, so my ballot was the Amphi School District bond override. With that, the insert in English had a return by date of October 30th. And then you flip it over on the other side, and it's Spanish, same location, and it had a 17 May 2014 date. But I believe there was corrective action that were done, including sending out postcards and even advise on radio stations.
How would you know if you lived in one of those areas that were supposed to vote? How would
You
you
get a
know?
ballot.
I'm not a mail voter. I don't vote.
They're all
Oh, they're all mail.
Oh, so they mail it to
Yeah.
everybody? and
This
you
is,
count it.
the city always does an all mail.
Well, I understand.
And because of the, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, because of the volume, or
Cost.
School districts and special districts, including fire districts, have the option of having a polling place election or an all-mail ballot election. The boards of those individual districts, seeing perhaps that 70+% of the people already vote by mail, have decided to go all-mail ballot elections, but they are not required to do so.
Do they reimburse you for the costs?
They do. We enter into an IGA for school districts. We don't enter into an IGA for each individual school district. We enter into an IGA with the county school superintendent,
Okay.
and then he or she then receives money from the individual school districts, or maybe takes that out of their bucket of money that he or she may be in control of, and reimburses both the elections department as well as the recorder for whatever expenses they may incur.
Okay. So if you don't get a ballot, you don't have to worry about it.
Is it possible, since you have multiple school districts this time, that you could have had a school district or districts that opted to do a mail only, and a school district or districts that opted to do polling place
Oh, yeah.
in the same election?
Yep.
Just to be a PITA.
So for example, some of the school districts I mentioned, the district boundaries of the school district overlap the municipal boundaries of the city of Tucson. So what has occurred in the distant past was that some of the school districts decided they were going to have a polling place election, while the city of Tucson decided to have an all-mail ballot election. So you got an all-mail ballot in the mail without ever requesting it.
Right.
Thinking, okay, any time now, my school district ballot's gonna show up.
Okay.
But it doesn't, because that one was conducted under a polling place election. So that was the age of confusion.
How would you know?
Uh,
How would you know?
Well, if you have a polling place election, then a sample ballot is sent out to your household approximately 10 days prior to the election. If you've not already voted by mail.
Gotcha.
So it has become smoother as far as from my administrative point of view, because I'm not running 2 elections simultaneously, a all-mail ballot election and a polling place election for the exact same voter household.
So do you make adjustments in the pricing in your governmental agreements depending on what pans out?
It depends, the answer is yes, but perhaps not the way that you might imagine. If the county is already conducting a general election, the coming presidential election, and a school district decides to come on board for a bond issue or some other special election, their boards, meaning their governing boards, are already on the general election anyway. Okay. For any jurisdiction, whether it's school districts, fire districts, community college districts, what have you, we already have if you will, a price menu. If you're going to conduct a standalone election, in other words, the county isn't conducting an election at the same time, you're going to bear 100% of the costs. We're going to provide those costs, I should say, we will pay those costs up front and then give the school district a bill to be reimbursed. If they decide to get on board with the ballot we're already printing anyway for a larger jurisdiction, then they pay so much per registered voter that's eligible to vote in that election. So those are the 2 things. You either pay 100% of the cost or you pay a fraction of the cost because you are fractionally on the ballot.
So I think I have a possible integrity issue that I want to discuss. So I'm concerned that people could be getting multiple ballots in the mail. For instance, people who live in the city as well as in one of the school districts.
They do.
So when we've determined that from the 2018 elections, that a number of people who are getting mail-in ballots tend to go and drop them off the day of the election at the polling place. So if that happens, who receives those ballots? Is it the city who's receiving the ballots, or is it the county? And there could be, if it gets in the wrong hands, will that ballot be counted because it's not received by the right entity?
I will not presume to respond for the recorder, but it's the ballot that needs to be in either the city clerk's hands or the recorder's hands, or their deputies, if you will, by 7 p.m. on election day. I can tell you, as we've had elections in the past, that if, for example, they put both ballots in one envelope and hand it to the city clerk, or they put the wrong ballot in the wrong envelope and they go this way, there is a mutual understanding that nobody wants to disenfranchise a voter. So if this county recorder, and I'm not presuming to speak for the recorder, but it's my understanding that this is how it's been done in the past. The exterior of that envelope that's being returned says it's a city ballot inside, but when they actually open it up, there's a county, in this particular case, the school district ballot inside. They put all that stuff back together, send it to the city, or to the school district, or whatever the appropriate ballot is, so that that ballot is counted.
But if you have a situation where a voter gets 2 ballots in the mail, and they take them both down to the polling place and drop them in the bucket, I'm assuming that at some point in time, when that bucket gets opened up, the ballots that are supposed to go to the recorder go to the recorder, the ballots that are supposed to go to the clerk go to the clerk.
Correct.
Okay. It isn't that because you dropped your county ballot in a city bucket, it gets thrown in the trash.
That's correct. That is to say, it doesn't get thrown in the trash.
Is that why there's a color stripe on top of the envelopes that they have?
Well, I know the city's return envelope is white in color, and the county's return envelope is a bright canary yellow in color. So there's already that kind of visual before you even open the envelope. But I think inside there are some color stripes.
Well, one of the envelopes has a red stripe on top, I saw it.
The other thing is the county ballot is 14 inches long, and the city ballot is 11 inches long.
Since we're talking about upcoming elections and the November election, I'd like to know, are we as a group, or does your department going to be doing anything to talk about the security in the voting procedures publicly so that we can be proactive for the assault that's going to be made on the election for it being rigged. When I joined the commission, you were still talking about the repercussions from the accusations that the voting was rigged and that there were illegal voters. And that was 6 months after it was probably a year and a half after the last election. So are we going to be doing anything proactive to say, here's how your vote is secure in Pima County? Is there going to be a PSA campaign? Is there anything we should be doing as a group to say the voting is not rigged? We're doing this to ensure that it's not rigged, that every vote's counted, that there's that every instance of fraud's investigated? Or, that's my question. Should we be doing that, thinking about doing that before the election so that after the election, when the assault happens?
Well, I can tell you what's happening at the state level within the state of Arizona, as well as the lesser jurisdictions at the county level. And the things that we can communicate about and to an extent address are cybersecurity issues. How misinformation gets out on the internet, however that may be, how a particular campaign or candidate's email is hacked. I can't do anything about those things. But I can emphasize, as we did in 2018, we put our security plan out on the internet. That's going to be updated for 2020. There is currently about $250,000 available to Pima County to be shared. I won't necessarily say equally because we haven't determined the math just as yet, between Pima County Recorder's Office and my office on what's broadly called fortification, to make sure that the processes within the Recorder's Office and the Elections Office pertaining to election security are addressed as best as we can, and those security measures, without giving away the keys to the door, are going to be communicated to people going forward. But as far as people making accusations that there's people on the voter registration rolls that shouldn't be, or people who are, or who should be on the voter registration rolls who shouldn't, or people who vote twice, certainly we train poll workers to be as astute as they can, but those are sometimes issues that if somebody wants to make a claim, I would ask them to prove it.
Are you talking about the upcoming city elections? Or
No, I'm talking about the 2020 election. Yeah.
Okay, you said November 5th, I think, I thought.
Because, when the president said, this is a rigged election, there's millions of people voting illegally, it was a big brouhaha, and I can see that happening again, regardless of who wins the election.
Well, that happened
There's
6
going to be
years
charges that is illegal and stuff, and it seems that my experience, at least, watching how the city conducts its elections inside, and I hope to be involved with the county to watch it. I feel pretty good about the way the ballots are handled, and I think that there's some merit in saying, in Pima County, we're doing this to make sure your vote is counted, and that it's a public declaration. Putting that you have a security plan on the internet is good, but how does that get to people in Pima County, right?
When we first put that out, we of course did a public information release, a press release, if you will, to the local media. Some of the media came and talked to me, but some of them...
Yes, they don't care.
Well, I won't say they don't necessarily care. Hopefully, and I'm going to pat Mike and other members of my staff on the back, and political parties in this organization, is that compared to other places in the United States, we do a pretty good job.
I think so.
Are you doing any advertising, paid advertising at the time of the election?
Operative there is paid.
That's why, you mentioned money.
Well,
What's the money for?
Yeah.
No, didn't we get to almost, was
Quarter
it
of a million?
$750,000 plus? Earlier in the year, and I missed the meeting when you discuss it, there was a federal grant of $3 million maybe
If we're talking about the same thing, then my memory is not what it used to be, but certainly the state
And then the state
it's
has
called
to
the
match it.
2018 HAVA money. So this was after the 2016 presidential election with some of these accusations were going wild. It was decided that we needed as a nation to improve election integrity. And so there was a 2018 HAVA bill that distributed money to the states. I think it was based on population. But I believe the state got approximately 3 million. That number may be changed. And then the Secretary of State has then doled that out to the counties, or at least has it in buckets for the counties to use, and that's the $250,000 I mentioned earlier that's available for Pima County going forward. But it has to be used for very specific things pertaining to election integrity / security. I can't go out and pay my poll workers with the money. Yeah.
But could you use it for advertising?
Whenever expenditure that a county wants to use it for, they have to pass it through the Secretary of State's office. If the Secretary of State's office blesses it, then there you go.
Well, it raises an interesting issue. Is there something here we want to put together as a program? Broad program that we want to send to the board or recommend they get involved with it at some level?
Has the money been spent already?
Oh no, we have until June 30th of 2020 to spend it. So all we've had done is we've been notified that there's a bucket of money of $250,000 that can be used for XYZ and only XYZ. For those of you who've perhaps not appreciated the complexity and confusion that will abound during the coming presidential preference election, please be ready for that. If I were to provide any money for advertisement, and I've begun to go down that road a little bit, and I was hoping that the Secretary of State might, and she still might. The number one thing that people need to understand for the presidential preference election is that it's closed. Closed. And so if you are not a member of one of the political parties participating, you cannot participate.
The party in this
Well,
case.
after 5 o'clock.
After 5 o'clock, I'm leaving the door open. But there will be tons of people showing up at the polls who will swear up and down that they've always been a member of the XYZ party, and apparently we've made some kind of mistake, and we're going to vote those people provisionally, because we're not going to say go away. But a lot of the ballots that are cast on election day that are provisional are going to end up being negated because their records show that they're affiliated with an opposite party, if you will, or they're not affiliated with a party at all. The other thing is, by statute, we are to lessen, I should say reduce, the number of polling places by half. So if you're always used to going to, Woods Library for your polling place, every election you go there, and you don't really pay attention to what's going on, especially if you're an independent like me, you're not going to get any notification in the mail that you're eligible to vote because you're not. So election day comes along, your neighbors are heading down to Woods Library to vote, you get in line with them, I'm standing in line with you, and let's say that your party is participating, you're able to go through the line and cast a ballot. When I come in, they'll say, you're not even on the list.
We're going to have that discussion about polling places that's coming up, is that not right?
I beg your pardon?
We were going, it seems to me it's on your plate to talk about polling places.
On the November 15th agenda, we will have our proposed consolidation of precincts to reduce from the approximately 250 to the 125. It's the same as we used in 2016, assuming that the Elks Club is still available or the St. Anne's Church is still available.
So, what was your intent on proposing what was $250,000 is going to be used for election security, or did you gone that far?
What I need probably most of that is an updated video surveillance system.
And how much would that cost? Is that?
I don't know yet. I've got the IT people working on it. And it may just be that the hardware is just fine, I just may need better software or additional cameras compared to what I already have. But that's my focus right now.
What is limiting in the current system?
Right now, I would say it's not as easy to use as when they first installed it. So in other words, it captures video. And let's say I want to find out what happened on a particular camera 3 days ago. It used to be a lot easier to say, okay, on this date, at this time, I want to see what they did on that camera. Right now, I get all kinds of warning about not enough memory and things of that nature. So-
You do have blind spots.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's not 100% coverage, yeah. But there are some places that I don't care whether I have 100%.
Are these stationary, or can somebody over the internet move the camera?
They're stationary.
There's no internet connection to that room at all.
I thought that these camera images were seen by the public. Is that not the case?
Yes, they are. But again, that's just the camera itself.
Right.
In terms of upcoming elections, we've got the city election, and Richard and I are getting ready next week to start marking ballots for the LMA. And Karen Schutte will be doing that for the Republicans. We're ready to go.
In your review, Barbara, of the ballots, what they've been sending out, have you noticed anything that looks irregular?
We won't want to see the ballots until we do the marking.
No, the format of what's going on. Has
I haven't
anybody
seen the
looked at
ballot.
it?
You know,
Let me have that information. I've been getting calls, and Levoy's been getting calls, Grady's been getting calls, and the Republican office has been getting calls. The affidavit of the ballot says not only, this is one that was actually received, the names are crossed out. Precinct 218, Ward 4, Party Republican. That's on the package that gets opened and processed. It's also visible in some cases through the envelope. Now, I'm being asked, is my ballot going in the trash that's being in the city of Tucson? Is it being intercepted in the mail room and never gets to the count?
Why, what's
That's
the
it.
problem?
It's
It's party disclosure on the ballot.
Why is it even
throwing
there?
away some parties, is that what the charge is?
The charge says, will my vote be counted?
is it a city,
It's city, it is
is
city.
it as a point of reference for me, is that a city ballot or is that?
That
a
is a
county
city ballot. It's a city
The
ballot.
county does not have that, at least the one I
But
received.
Right,
we are kind of charged, you know, I get these goofy calls that are, you're in charge of ethics for the whole world. And, or you are the Pima County Election Integrity Committee, and that, and far as I know, Tucson still, they haven't opted out to move down to Cochise County or somewhere else yet. So, this kind of thing is there, and I think this is the kind of thing that Richard was talking about that creates chatter that's not necessary.
Well, it
It's an
would be a-
important privacy issue.
There you go. All right, you gotta be all over the sucker.
And so,
But it's Tucson.
So the worry is that because they've identified by party, that the city will throw ballots away. Is
yeah,
that the word?
well,
So,
whatever, you know, the ballots are supposed to be anonymous.
So,
They are anonymous.
No, they're not.
Your name is not there.
The county ballots are double blinds. I mean, you can't do that with a county ballot.
No, I agree.
that would be my question is, what relevance is, if it were the PPE, that would be a different story, because ballots are gonna be sorted by party. But what's the relevance to having
So
party
here's-
designation on the ballot?
somebody, so first of all, I believe, if I heard this correctly, I didn't see these ballot packet myself, but on the packet that's mailed to the voter, this party preference is on it. So somebody delivering it, or maybe opening up inappropriately the mailbox, could see it as Republican and remove it.
What's a federal felony?
Once you, it is, that doesn't stop, it doesn't stop the electoral
They
detection
steal the
issues.
packages from work?
So the voter fills it out, puts it back in, now it's on the return envelope. Somebody could do the same thing at that point. The postal system, there is people handling it, it could be collected, thrown away. There's a lot of mischief that could happen. When it gets to looking at the signature to verify the signature, this is done manually. Somebody could look at that and have, based on the party, they could decide whether to accept the signature or not, because they've seen the party act differently because of what the party is on the affidavit. So there's a number of steps all the way in between that knowing the party is not appropriate.
And
We'll bring this up to the city, yeah.
certainly, we can bring it up to the city here, but I think since you guys have formed a subset, and I don't say that in a derogatory way, this would, I think, in my opinion, carry more weight coming from a political party than it would coming from this issue.
He's got both parties.
It needs
All
to come
parties.
from
All
from
parties.
us.
There's no need to.
Can we
I
say
would
that-
like to see us, let me just get this out. I'd like to see us as a integrity committee make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they engage either in a form of a letter or whatever to the city of Tucson saying, hey, this doesn't add up. And now here we go, politics, okay? It shouldn't happen,
Probably not gonna do that.
and they're probably not gonna do that. But let's get ourselves out in front of it.
Well, how about if Richard and Karen Schutte and I all bring this up when we're working with the city election and get some answers and put on the next.
Well,
agenda?
okay, but you can do all that, but the cat's out of the bag.
Right, sure, well,
We can't put it back in.
you're not gonna fix this election
No,
ballot.
so the question I have, very candidly, is does this invalidate the election?
Well, talk to the city attorney,
I mean,
Is there,
and-
there's a city recorder, right?
city clerk.
City clerk.
And the clerk is the person.
Clerk acknowledges it's a problem.
Okay, we will bring this up, right, Richard? We will bring this up when we work at the city.
Whose idea was this?
We'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting and tell you what the city's response is.
But just to clarify, we don't have that problem. Okay.
To my knowledge. Again,
I've never seen.
not yet. Our early ballot packets are the responsibility of the recorder, but to my knowledge, party affiliation is not inkjetted in.
And the city sends out their own, the recorder doesn't send them out.
And you can see it through the envelope in some cases, through the outer envelope.
The only place the county has it is in the signature verification process, and I believe, we can talk about it, I believe there's some work on the way to possibly fix that. If Meth Ann, I believe she's talking about fixing that. So,
It's not on the county
not about, no.
ballot
No.
information
It's only,
anywhere.
only on the signature process.
Can we put it on the next agenda and talk about it?
We'll bring that up at future agenda.
Yeah.
Election will be over.
We can't do anything about name.
No. I just think we should inform the Board of Supervisors of this and make a recommendation and speak to the city about it. And I'd like to make that motion.
What do you want them to do?
I want them to use their political influence and their power of office to say, hey,
They
you've
have-
done something
They-
stupid.
They have none.
They have none, yeah.
Could write a letter to the Star if you want to.
Yeah.
That might have more of the.
Yeah.
Well, let's get us all on record about this. I'd like to make that motion that we send in from this board, from commissioners, we send a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they notify the county, that the county notify the city that they're aware of this, and this creates an election integrity issue.
Okay, you're putting that in the form of a motion.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Yes. Wouldn't it be more effective just to write a public letter and deliver it?
That will probably.
Because the other people may discuss this for a year before they decide to do anything, because they don't want to do anything.
This will not be the only issue, but we're the only mission that gets accomplished. There'll be others that'll raise hell about this, I can assure you, including the candidates for ward office. They'll get, I'm
Sure,
sure.
but that's not our business, that's for them
Well,
to
no,
decide.
it is our business. I quite disagree with you. This affects the integrity, perceived integrity of elections. And it's going to spill over, and we're going to get a broad smear out of it as well.
I'm not contesting that, I'm saying what we can do. We can't help people.
All I'm
what to
saying,
say.
I would agree with you that our board has no say over city elections, our board of supervisors. We are, however, advisors to the board, and they have conversations with the city every day about everything from garbage pickup to water service. In fact, they fight annually over water service. So this is a little something where we need to stand up and say, hey, as an election integrity commission, this is not right.
I agree with you, but your way of doing it, I disagree with.
Well, let's,
Okay,
fine.
Okay.
any further discussion? Any objection to sending the, let's do it the old-fashioned way, we won't do it the board of supervisors way. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say the same sign.
I,
Nay.
How many?
By a show of hands, all in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Richard, is that up or down or non-committal?
You who raised the issue,
You're not allowed
you raise your hand.
I hate
Good
making
God.
instant decisions without thinking about
You're not allowed to abstain, bylaws.
it. Right, it says you can't abstain.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, it carries 5 to 3. I'm assuming the other 3 would vote no. All right. If you want some particular content in there, please.
I will draft something to get to you,
No, get it to Michael.
Michael.
will Get it to me.
and we need to do this reasonably soon, in my opinion.
Okay,
Can I-
then,
point of order?
just let me clarify something. If you're gonna put something together, then I have the ultimate say on what goes out. If you
That's
want to do it
correct.
relatively soon, or we're gonna wait till the November meeting to get your approval.
No, I think we should be able to get together on
Okay.
it, assuming you're going to be reasonable as always.
when will it get on the supervisor's agenda? in terms of bringing it?
Probably sometime in December at the earliest.
Just a suggestion that if you're going to send something out under the name of the commission to wherever it goes,
Just to the board.
well, that you state that the decision was adopted by a vote of,
5 to 3.
I mean, otherwise people say, well, it's probably unanimous, and that's not the way to do
That's
it.
fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
We've killed upcoming elections and current elections. All right. EI Isaac, Steve.
So I'm not sure what I said about this before, I guess it was containing the agenda. So I get this regular mailing. It has a lot of election-related stuff in it, and I think it would be useful to everybody here. It does have some issues that I don't know how they deal with the open meetings laws, because this communication has things that you cannot share. So they have sort of a security coding, says, you know, whether you can share it with everybody, whether you can share it with only people that are involved in elections in some way.
Who is the group?
So,
Is it a government
the-
group or what?
yeah, so this is election, the EI is elections infrastructure. And most of it is kind of IT related, so, but not all. And frankly, I'm not even sure how I got this. So when ES&S came long ago, they said, hey, we have these tools, and I asked for those, and they told me to contact someplace, and that someplace said, sure, we'll sign you, you have to sign up, but we need your government email address, which I do not have. And about then, I contacted Brad and said, hey, can you help in any way? Any ideas here? So I don't know what you did. You can, Ed.
So if I recall the process, you made your application to this organization, and then either they got in touch with me because you maybe identified me, perhaps not, but at any rate, they needed me to give the thumbs up that Steve was okay to communicate with, and then there is various levels of information that I'm saying, okay, Steve can see level 1 and level 2. And I'm making these things up. But, there are certain things that I made him available to have, and now he's flooded with these things, because I get probably 2 or 3 a day. I'm not certain how many you might get. And then you get a week's summary, and then you get a monthly summary, and it is information overload. It is, if not 100%, at least 99% IT related, specific to elections. It lets you be informed. And when I say elections, it's not just tabulation, it's also voter registration as well. And it may tell you what happened in making a county. In Franklin County, Pennsylvania, that they came across this particular nuance as they were testing equipment or something of that nature. So it is a flood of information. I appreciate it, but I cannot say that I find that much applicable to what we do here locally, because it's often talking about a system that we don't have and probably never will have, or it's talking about a responsibility that my office doesn't have, such as voter registration. So I appreciate it, but I would say maybe 20% of it is something that I actually pay attention to. So it's a flood of information.
I still don't understand who's this coming from. Is it a federal agency here?
I have to recall, but my understanding is that after the 2016 election, there already was an MS ISAC, and I can't remember what the MS stands for. It's basically technology on a very broad scale. And then they decided that there needed to be something very specific for elections, and that's when they started EI ISAC.
Who is they?
I think it's again, I need to double check that, so I don't want to give out any bad information. But I believe the EAC may be involved, NIST may be involved, IEEE may be involved in some capacity, but those, I will hold that open for correction on our next meeting.
So it has something to do with the federal government somewhere? Is that what you're saying?
Only
I think
loose,
just,
only loose.
The Help
It's-
Americans
it's-
Vote Act, I believe, is where this connection was made. Because I brought this up and I wanted to know what you guys were hearing. And then you missed a couple meetings, and that's why you're on the agenda. I'm interested in trying to understand what security issues we need to be concerned about. And if there's this big clearinghouse going on, and it's identifying issues that maybe are relevant to us, how do we get that? And I believe that, Brad, you said that some things you can't share and some things you can. Well, we're going to wait till Steve gets back.
What does ISAC stand for?
I do not know. I just this morning went looking to see.
EI ISAC, Elections Infrastructure, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, was established by the EISGCC, don't know what that is yet, to support the cybersecurity needs of the elections subsector, period. Through the EI ISAC, election agencies will gain access to an elections-focused cyber defense suite, including sector-specific threat intelligence products, incident response and remediation, threat and vulnerability monitoring, cybersecurity awareness and training products, and tools for implementing securities best practices.
And so sometimes it goes like very broad, like that there was a lot of electronic activity from a foreign government, for instance. So, and they'll mention various places within the United States that have had someone paying them. So there's someone pounding on the door, seeing what they can open up. And so you kind of get the IT people for those groups should be seeing that and go, how do we make sure that nothing gets out? But everybody else kind of can see that as a sort of a broad spectrum. Oh, here is what's going on. This is the kind of thing that is happening. And you can kind of before election, you see a lot more of this activity, and they start reporting higher threats, so that this color-coded thing kind of indicates the level of the threat.
The information that you shared when this first got on our radar screen is, you can follow threads through this, because you'll provide an article and it says if you want more information, click on this link, and it's a never-ending cycle. You can follow links forever, but the amount of information can be as detailed
Yes.
or as broad as you're willing to chase down. I mean, there's a ton of information out there. The resounding thing that keeps coming up time after time, regardless of political party affiliation or race, and something that they're pushing nationally, is paper ballots, paper ballots, paper ballots. And I said, we got paper ballots for everything we do. I mean, even the stuff that's done on the electronic handicap voter access things now produces a paper ballot. So we have a paper record of all our election results that we keep for 2 years.
If it's federal.
So, does that mean we don't have people trying to hack us? No, probably about 5,000 times a minute if we're typical of everybody else. But I don't know that there's, you can't stop the attacks. You can be successful in thwarting them, but stopping them isn't something we're ever going to be able to do. But having the information, I think, is, in those rare moments when I don't have anything else to do, provides some interesting reading.
So,
I'm sorry, there's a question about this mailing list is a US only mailing list, I presume? I mean, and
You
also-
have to, as I let Steve know, or I should say I let them know that Steve was legitimate, I think it has to be from a governmental agency within the United States giving a green light for somebody to look at.
is it shared with other international groups that have similar interests?
No
And
idea.
secondly, if not, are there international mailing lists that exist, and I think there are, that provide better, more focused information about election security than this one?
I have no idea.
Do you have any comment on that?
In chasing something down, I did find some international groups chasing this down. More focused, that depends on what more focused in this, depending on how you look at this is very focused, or it can be. It's just where do you want to look at the time? So, it's the international thing that I chased down was just a little different in terms of what we saw.
I mean, there are some very famous cases internationally of break-ins by countries and hackers that come up in the news regarding Europe and the rest of the world, but not here. So,
Yeah, there definitely was, actually on Isaac, there was, they did talk about an election in another country that was, and what the hacking was that they found. So, I actually was kind of surprised to find out on this.
So how do you think this information can be useful to us? Can you maybe get us some, I don't want to see everything, but anything interesting out of a monthly summary or something?
Good question. So to me, the usefulness depends on whether we really try to do things that are more, I don't know, publicity related, because that, the stuff that is really IT related, it's, we're not here going to fix the IT problems, and we've all seen that we do pretty good that way. So anyhow, but the public perception, when they hear that these places were hacked, us knowing that that there was a piece of information from some county in Indiana or something. Us knowing that, hey, yeah, that happened and it was known about and closed may be helpful as far as sort of public communication. But if we never say anything to reassure people because of things we're seeing there, then it doesn't matter. And then having that information doesn't really work to our advantage.
Can you just sort of distill down anything you find that would be useful to us?
It's a lot, and what I could try. Let me spend the next round here seeing what would happen if I did that.
If you come up with anything decent, we'll double your salary.
Well, thank you. That's a really great thing.
Brad, have you sent anything back to the EISIC saying that we've had this issue, that please add this to your...
We haven't had an issue. They did advertise our security plan. So when I put our security plan out, they put it out for everybody else as, maybe a best practice that they may wish to follow. So, that's, and I didn't even put that out there. It's when I put the press release out, they apparently found it and then sent it out into the universe. So.
Okay, anything else on Isaac?
Put it on the agenda whenever you think there's something we should know about,
Okay.
or circulate it to Michael or whatever.
Okay, Levoy.
Mr. Cody.
He'll be back.
So, just a quick take on this one. The work that we did on this document body, a lot of research on it. A lot of it, as John said, was not just, pulled out of thin air and stuff. Kind of hopefully that lead to discussion of election, what does election integrity look like? I was a little surprised and a little bit disappointed in some of the reaction last week. I think the bottom line is we are pretty far apart on what we think it looks like, okay? I think to our side, election integrity is pretty simple. Counting every legally cast vote by every legally registered citizen of the United States. But there are some people who think that voter suppression. All right? Voter suppression is when my vote gets canceled by the illegally cast vote, okay? But it's obvious from that discussion last week that we are worlds apart.
Last week.
Last month, thank you. Last month, we are worlds apart on any agreement on that. But so, as far as I'm concerned, I'm done with the discussion.
Just a comment. I would say if you look at what's going on with respect to the practices of both parties, that you share a commitment to buying information or getting information about individuals and turning it around in an aggregated or disaggregated way with a little bit more investment and manipulating or neutralizing their votes. And that's plain and simple. And that's something that both parties should confront.
Legally neutralizing.
Sorry?
Legally neutralizing a vote is perfectly legal. I mean, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Having a targeted mailing to a particular area of voters is not illegal.
I'm talking about what happens with the databases that both parties have when they're doing campaigning for any election, where the person at the call center gets instant intelligence about how to respond, either in receiving a call or making a call, to manipulate the opinion of the voter, either to vote for their party or to not to vote at all if they're going to vote against their party, or to confuse the voter sufficiently so they won't participate at all if there's any risk that they might vote against their party. This is the way business is done. I mean, it's well documented. And I think that if you're really concerned with integrity, why don't you look in the mirror?
I think, first of all, First of all, the word manipulate, I think, has a very...
I'm sorry?
The word manipulate has a very negative connotation, okay?
But you can change the word, but it's the same
I
thing.
would call it campaigning.
Sorry?
I would call it campaigning and voter
Yeah.
information. This is how politics works. As long as it's done legally with legal people, I frankly don't have a problem. It's just one team against the other. That's how the game's played. And you know, it's how it is.
It didn't always work that way, and it doesn't need
Sure did.
to work that way.
Sure it did.
So
It's always worked that way.
Sorry?
It's always worked.
Always worked that way.
No, because we didn't have the means to
So
make it work that well.
there,
Sorry.
you know, humans sometimes have a single issue, and if a politician were to talk to that person about that issue and say, vote for me because I'm going to help you with that issue, that's campaigning. That's the way it's always been.
Well, but this is perhaps, it's off. All I'm saying is that the definition of integrity, it's easy to know when something is not consistent with integrity than it is to know that it is, because this is a broader discussion about what elections should do and that we don't do anymore. And so I just put that aside because we want to go to lunch. But I think the issue, if you're going to discuss that more broadly, is something that deserves a reasoned discussion.
I don't disagree that it could deserve some discussion, but stuff's been going on for forever kind of thing. However, it does not get away from the fact, and this is why I kept the definition simple, legally cast vote by a legally registered citizen of the United States. That to me is the core issue of election integrity. And one thing we don't talk about here, we talked about this before, this group talks about vote counting. This is a vote counting commission.
I'm not sure about that.
Well, that's the last time we talked about the integrity of the voter registration database.
Go back before that, there are other issues we haven't talked about.
Answer my question, please.
Sorry?
When's the last time we talked about the voter registration database? The voter registration
Actually,
integrity
it was in
is...
2015.
Okay, old
Well,
history.
I mean, it doesn't go
Okay,
away.
so it's
As the board says in back of you, you
So it's
know,
4 years ago.
once you say it's out there, it doesn't disappear.
Okay, so it's 4 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that stuff.
But actually, if you just didn't talk about it, we made some proposals to be investigated.
Okay.
Actually, if you look at the history of this commission, it was created as a result of vote counting.
Yes, exactly.
And it was probably inappropriately named.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't have any issue with that, it's
You
just
know,
be honest about it.
I think and I don't have issue, it's, you know, if we want to sit here and talk about the recorder, we can talk about the recorder all day long. If we're talking about the recorder with the anticipation that either this commission or the Board of Supervisors is going to change anything in the recorder's office, maybe we will because the recorder thinks it's a good idea, and probably we won't because the recorder thinks it's none of our damn business.
Well,
That's a fact.
But to correct what you said before, Brian, the cases that came out of the initial challenge that led to the creation of this commission, in the deliberations of the courts, in the various legal contests that were held, they just didn't talk about vote counting. They did, but they got into the question of what is a legitimate vote. It was part of the process. It's hard to separate the two. So it wasn't even simple then, if you look at the data, and it hasn't changed that much.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just like you are the chairman of this commission, and we have a voice, that's called in some places, by a negative connotation, a political pulpit. And if the board collectively decides to say something to the recorder or enter into negotiations with the recorder or the city clerk or any other third party outside of the Board of Supervisors control, they can do that, and they can speak to that publicly as a bully pulpit. Now, they can speak nicely, they can speak roughly, They can speak in any way they want to speak. The Board of Supervisors, you're correct, is equal in stature by the Constitution of this state to the recorder. And she says, hey, I matter, I don't want to do it. Okay, then that's the way it is. And that's the way it'll be in her office. But it doesn't mean that, Arnie, doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about what it is to try and get this as good as we can, or get this, what are perceived issues out of the way. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do that. I think we should. And, you know, that's maybe we have fundamental differences in some of our thinking processes, but let's air them out.
So your simplification of the, you know, it's just counting the votes, you know, making sure every voter's count got in and counted. If you think about that, the ballot thing you brought up today, I think that was very much an integrity thing. Okay, so it has information on there about party affiliation that doesn't belong, right? And now some of that could mean that they filled out the ballot and someone threw it away later. But some of it could be, oh, we just didn't, they took it out of your mailbox because of what you said. Okay, so now the voter just didn't vote. So if you're narrowly focused on, well, make sure my vote counts, well, I didn't vote, so it doesn't apply. Well, I think integrity does apply there. You want to make sure not only does their vote count, but that they knew they had the opportunity to vote, they knew where they had to vote. Those things are part of making it so the opportunity to vote can be manifest as an actual ballot cast. So I think there are some things that are a little, that you gotta look a little further to be able to get that whole piece. And I think that in that way, we should be viewing things a little more broad, even if, I think, personally, I think it's pointless to have this commission if we just say, oh, all that stuff that is registered, we have to ignore. I mean, because it's most of the issues would be in the registrar.
Your point is spot on as far as it goes. Okay, how do you know that that ballot that gets sent out is sent to a citizen of the United States, registered properly? How do you know that?
The solutions to those problems, but that they're radical and they're not partisan.
Well, they seem to be.
I think they're probably.
Well, because the superficial discussions at a certain level.
I think part of the problem is you're a lot more suspicious of the person who signs an affidavit and says, yes, I am a citizen, and goes through the checking and all that sort of thing. And you're still suspicious.
Trust but verify.
You're still suspicious, and I think the Democrats do not want anybody to vote who's not supposed to be voting, but they don't want to have people eliminated that should be voting for, eliminated for stupid reasons.
And if we were to get into discussions of this kind of thing, I've done a lot of research on this thing. We're finding, you find, for instance, that a study, very exhaustive study recently showed that voter ID does not restrict voter turnout. In fact, it may actually improve it in some cases.
I'd like to, would you circulate that study?
It's when you have to pay for it, so I'm not going to do that. Unfortunately. Yeah, it is. I paid to get
Hurry
it.
up, Barbara.
But, you know, if we're going to start citing cases
Yeah.
Yeah.
on one side
But
of
we're not.
it's a different meeting.
Exactly.
And certainly, you know, you can cite cases where the violations of mail-in ballots were Republican districts, and
But it doesn't change my goal, my vision of what it really looks like. Citizens properly cast, properly registered, cast their votes. Pretty simple.
I don't
But-
find any opposition to that. The question is,
It
how do
seems
you
like-
prove that they are properly?
Well,
That's a good question.
Okay, right now we're using, thanks to certain people, we're using the driver license database of Arizona to verify citizenship. That's nonsense. Arizona issues driver's licenses legitimately to non-citizens.
But those are flagged out. They're not part of the voter database.
We would hope.
I think.
That's a vulnerability in the
Is that
current
it?
problem.
We're going to,
Integrity.
We're getting off topic, thank you. I'm done.
later, at another meeting.
Those can be put on the agenda for later, the topics, yes, but I'm done. But so I'm taking this off, I'm done.
Okay, good.
Next topic.
Yeah, I think there's several words here that we have trouble with. Pima, county, integrity,
Elections,
and perception.
elections,
Elections.
that was an election.
Well, we don't want to push them pickles.
Okay, Arnie, questions to the recorder?
I want to make Brian very happy. I'm going to ask that this permanently be removed from the agenda for this commission, this topic.
Well, at least until after November 3rd of next year.
Okay.
Well, if I may, I would like to see us continue to try to work with the recorder to get her engaged.
Can I just make, I mean, she's not going to be around very long.
No.
And she doesn't, I don't think there's much of a motivation for her to get engaged with us. That's why I suggested earlier that we get involved with the election of a new recorder in a nonpartisan way to find out, just ask questions about her thoughts about, his or her thoughts about these problems. I mean, that would be something we could do. They're not going to say no to. And it may have some positive effect.
Put that on the, let's put that on next month's agenda.
I think didn't we have sort of agreement that to be a formal item it was not very useful, but to do a meet and greet outside of the formal meeting might be appropriate?
Can we do that, though, under the open meeting law?
We can't.
We can?
You can't.
Not.
We have to notice
You
it.
can't.
We can as
Because I have.
individuals, but not all of us as individuals.
That's right.
And so that's, I'm understanding of what you wish to do, and I would like to see us talk about that at the November.
As long as you don't serve
We've gone
alcohol.
off the phone.
If you're not serving alcohol, it's
We gotta get them there, so we, the real treat is getting this guy earlier so they can have our coffee before we.
What did you want added to the agenda? I know we have
This discussion of the recorder and her involvement. And just put down what you have now for Arnie, that's fine. Broad enough.
Oh, no. Don't put questions on there.
No. They want to do that.
Recorder involvement. Does that fit everybody's, Arnie?
Are we on future agendas?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No, we are,
Okay.
We're on questions to the recorder. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
We'll rephrase it. Anything else? Well, no,
No.
you were the, okay.
Done.
And we've taken care of November election plans.
To my knowledge.
Now, future agenda items.
I think he's got it. Does that suit you as a name?
Sure.
Or do you want to talk about inviting candidates to speak, recorder candidates? How do you
I
want?
like the better cocktail party.
How would
there
you
will
like
be
to
plenty
word?
of those.
How would you like to word it, sir?
I don't care about the words of this.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be bringing the proposed consolidation of precincts for the presidential preference election.
Will you be starting on re-precincting?
It's already been done by statute, it had to be done by October the 1st.
Oh, I thought it was.
And when they moved the August primary up, everything else moved up. We got short input, but
Too late?
after the legal deadline.
That's too bad, because it's really a strange
What-
line.
Put redistricting on there as a future agenda item.
Ooh.
Talk about a topic that never
It,
goes away.
well, when it comes to certain issues, it's a whole different issue, once you get below the legislative districts.
So, are you talking about the, after the 2020 census, the redistricting?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that, we'll talk about it next month. There are things there that are of concern to me.
Are they concerned with this commission?
I think so. I think
I'm
so.
sorry, I missed that part of it.
Are they commission business?
And I'm not as concerned with the LDs and CDs.
currently I have EI6 summary, recorder involvement, precinct consolidation, and redistricting. Is there other?
So far, that's what you have,
And reports on the elections.
and reports on the election.
Let's put bylaws update, please. And here's why. Two things. First of all, your 5-year would go.
Not why, just
Your-
bylaws update. I don't have a problem with it being on there.
Well, here it is, okay. Bylaws may be amended at any regular meeting by the EIC by a 2/3 vote of those present voted. So it's,
Yeah, we can do it
we
here.
can do it. Now, don't put my name on it, 'cause I won't be here. And I haven't missed 4 meetings, so.
So you want a bylaws update, but you're not gonna be here to discuss?
Well,
No.
you guys
I'm just asking, is there something you would like on here also?
No,
Okay. If you come up with something, please send it to me. Anything else?
No, and the bylaws update, I would like somebody other than the commission entirely to come up with potential wording, because we could literally spend, because we have spent all day here fighting over the language of bylaws, and we will, regardless of how it's done. But,
Is there anything else that we need to discuss other than attendance issues?
I think
Any
it
other items?
merits just looking at the bylaws.
I have a handout.
In fact, let's make the topic bylaws regarding the attendance issue.
Actually, let's make the topic bylaws committee.
Bylaws committee.
Ooh.
You don't get committee.
You can do subcommittees.
Well, you don't necessarily, because as
No,
you
we
said,
didn't
it can
see
be
if we have a
changed at the meeting.
This-
But the virtue of the committee,
Is
going
to
back to
look
earlier
at the bylaws
discussion,
from beginning to end.
is that, it has to be developed in context, otherwise it won't work, or there'll be people contesting it.
Because one of the things we found when we did the last bylaws review is, we wanted to change this piece, but poking it here caused a bump over here.
So who's the
It's
bylaws
complicated.
committee?
Well, it was Chris and Ernie and myself.
There's a 5-year requirement for review.
Right.
And we did it 2 years ago.
Why are we doing this?
Yeah, why are we doing this other than the attendance issue?
That's what I suggested, that we limit the topic to the attendance issue.
Okay.
And can somebody come up with a
Okay, so
specific change that you-
Bylaws, just put bylaws.
Okay.
All right?
We have
That way it's
recorded
really
it.
hard to violate the
So,
meeting rules.
is there anything leading up to the presidential preference election we need to discuss at the next meeting?
Precinct consolidation. That's the only thing we won't have. Certainly I'll entertain any questions that might come up, but it's pretty cut and dry. We do it by the statutes.
I do have something to add. John poked me on the memo we got from the Huckleberry sent to the supervisors on board supervisors memorandum.
It's November
22nd.
22nd.
Some of that was 2016.
2016, yeah, but there's a section called election integrity that talks about, at the very end of that section, there are recommendations that went forward. I'd like us to discuss those recommendations and see if we need to assert those for the board of supervisors, or to have other assertions in terms of.
I think for the 2020 legislative cycle, I think that's probably gone to the board of supervisors already. That might be necessary to wait to the 2021 legislative election cycle.
So you're saying that in November we would have that information, or it's forthcoming in?
So I don't know what date is going to be put on the board of supervisors agenda. I haven't done any analysis, I haven't researched that, so I can't say, but I certainly can spend some time, so maybe we can report on what the board approved for election law changes, legislative agenda items.
BOS legislative agenda, and it should be part of the consent calendar on the board of supervisors agenda, if it's been approved by the board already.
Okay, so what would you-
BOS legislative agenda.
Okay, BOS legislative agenda.
And if it hasn't been passed, it'll be passed before the November meeting because they want it in Rassey's hands before the legislature goes into session.
And they don't ask our opinion ahead of time.
Right.
And if I may, is there any hint of any preference that other members would like to have? A lot of these things, like the recorder being involved with us, and the election commission, are in our recommendation. And we specifically, I think, said broaden the selection process to include a recorder's appointment.
Come up with the criteria and I'll present it to the board of supervisors and they can tell us to go pound sands.
Well, sure,
You got it.
sure. But is that something that's of more interest to do earlier than later?
Sooner the better.
Okay, 'cause some of the other things I'm sure will be polarized, more polarized.
Could you prioritize them?
Well, that's what you've asked, and that's what we'll try to do.
But I mean, will it be, sorry to be so picky, but is it gonna be a strict rank ordering, or these are the important ones, these are the unimportant ones?
There are no
relatively speaking?
unimportant.
Sorry, that's why I said relatively speaking, within
There
your
are no
universe.
relative. In fact, this probably
I think
needs
we're
to
off
be
this
said.
topic.
Yeah, we are off the topic, but we agonized over these, the briefer list of recommendations, and we broadened it to have some detail so that you could see a person who was new to this could understand from where we came.
Put
But
commission,
that's the end of it.
commission composition on next month's agenda. Come up with a list, we'll talk about it. I'm hungry.
Uh-oh.
Yugoslavia.
Future meetings. November 15th, January 17th, a problem for anybody? February 21st, a problem for anybody?
That's a problem to me. And that rodeo weekend, so that's the reason that it's a problem, is because a vacation got scheduled way ahead.
Well, you don't enter the rodeo.
Yeah.
We have a war hours.
I-
Rodeo grounds, there's no traffic
You
issues.
have a number on your back.
Okay, any other business?
Move
Hearing
to
none, this
adjourn.
commission stands adjourned.